Okay, so Master Mason note coming out here. We'll be doing class, I think 9 and 10 as a double up. We're just doing some research today, staying on Corona for the most part, tracking it. I haven't got any notes down as far as the moment. It's hard to actively track things, especially numbers from out here. You really got to get good with informational points. They kind of come in with time frames and things like that, so realistically, I'm keeping my Facebook line inactive to what's going on in the culture today. Uh, I really want to keep track of this one. It's almost a new fad to a certain degree, the new Pokemon back when it was coming out with the kids. And you get to that point informationally where, like, the Pentagon conversations and the presidential addresses, and especially adjusted swings to new forms of what that is being a dictated state. So you can do with the information what you do with it, given your perspective and location, certain areas of the topography and math under the curve, who's got the educational systems, and in what basis color. When I say a word, there should be forms to it that correlate to any of the given system inside of there. So, it's been the main track today. I've been watching Corona hard. Uh, Data mining YouTube is a very difficult thing. It takes a very long sequence of windows, and reading the variables are the other big component. You can study a lot of math. You can study a whole bunch of math, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get you anywhere. Hey, you gotta get in the pushes. Uh, of course, I could always be better, bigger. There's a lot about that. Do you go out and exercise correctly? Do you adjust your home life method to the times and sequences of the environment? The XYZ, pressures and gradients, velocities. Does it need to be a pandemic? Absolutely not. The thing that makes a kid cool when they're young like that to do a certain thing is they start drilling it out, getting to the parents. Hey, doorknob, everything. Turn around and figure out the rotations on timelines. Go in R's. Like, I touch my nose up here, I do that stuff, and as soon as I get ready to do something else, bang. It gives me the luxury of being able to do both. And if in an area where the statistics are high for something to be, you really want to drop that down as much as possible. Now, this applies universally right across under the curve, the slope problem of which way the gravity's pulling on it, pushing on it, or frictions, which field under the X this kind of goes. Pardon my But at any rate, so I love the military, of course, as a whole. I think it's one of the biggest things you support as the taxing function. Obviously, they're not making corn directly. They are on the top end of the efficiency of the information. So they are training techniques and timelines and new adapted models that you can use managerially on the floor if you're keeping up with the contextuals. What do these forms look like? Is that the new PT test? Is it a way to refine that to a local setting for who you have and what the local system is? So one of the cool ones that I posted up for the homework tonight is right now a good time to join the military? And in the mills and things like that, come winter around, this is just the operation switch over. Somebody bought a saw. When you put M1, 2, and 3 and coronavirus or COVID-19 on here, it really doesn't make much difference. It works mechanically to it. So the other exponent that I wanted to pose an axiom to you, do all this derivative math to the I don't know if it's not an integral equation, it's differential equation. You get all that down there, it's going to write out to y, and it's a very nice tight equation of what the work is with a bunch of radiants as you work in this out. And so you're about taking that kind of mechanic and kind of referencing them the irrational number a bunch and crossing out all of this stuff that kind of works all the way across, that it's balanced in here when they're crossing those off, extending the equation out so it's subparts just to y, just to what the irrational function is. And if you take that process and you break it down, the cost in analyzing functions. But the exponent I want to bring up was I did catch one of those Fox ones, and I'm watching generals and I'm watching presidents, and this guy's, well, this underhanded, democratic, and it was aggressive in the tone. And there's a clear way to define what the function is and the motive, and then you have to look at this certain situation, regardless of what the components could be. You could capitalize off of the time and our speed to be able to get those numbers. It's a test. You can't physically pass that unless something physically passes that. And the omega calc on the bodies in Italy, or how that adjusts to New York City, Florida, or any of us, defines an extended problem of what the invisible hand issue really is. It's not Boeing, it's distance and travel and how we get there and what's the sensible models and the resources we have. So is right now a good time to do it. If you got the heart to it, you got the skills, probably happy to have you. I would be happy to have anybody who would come in here ready to calculate and do physical brick work. Being able to get in there and adjust those systems, see from phase differentials what the job is, and act in accordance with the skills thereof. It's sometimes you're down here, sometimes you're up there, and it's the same job. Manager comes around asking you questions about things. Well, it's really about here's what the physics was, here's the operation, or here's the points of what are the consistent models of where that is. If you're adjusting on those things, it's, older cultures used to call these things, some of the features. Whether it be training horse or training men, you see some brother roll into the village, the skill is small set. It's absolutely on the mill floor when somebody turns that over. That you're riding cavalry. You oppose a higher momentum, the velocity over what somebody can do with the AR-15 or Petri dish. Obviously negative irrational numbers to the positive gravity calc that is corona means that you have to be treated carefully, or understand that this science is the result of your actions. We have to personally be responsible for that. I'd love to tell you, you don't think that one's good enough? What's your model? What was wrong with your model being the new one? Is it cheaper, more efficient, that inside of the timelines of the calculus that you're dealing with inside of there, the cost of the resources to the output, and how long you can do, adjusted for pi, Euler's number, Euler's number, kid systems, Marines overseas? Hey, I guess you should. These classes are hard to find. There's a lot of people doing this work, so regardless of whatever information you're going to wind up getting, it's like all this is a good conversational model with proper training for the skill sets and good direction. People who do that with black hole calc and some of the hierarchy, it's like that now exists. It's a standard of what that is, and you have to excel beyond that with tightening down the information, separating it, and potentially teaching somebody the entire gap. You don't know where somebody's going to apply information. All right, wait a minute. YouTube video clearly rated R because it's math, right? And it takes too much time for you to understand math. In the reality of how dangerous it can be towards just statistics, strategies, if you're looking at a town like it's a cosmic radiation background map with high spots and bubbles, they call them makavas in certain ancient societies of energy bubble. The physics in itself is good, and then you get well, it's all biometric, really. And physics and calculus and how to train it, you'll figure some things out. We're not here to necessarily discuss those functions. We're here to talk business. We're here to talk about the underlying function of two camels and a goat for doing land negotiations or hillsides. The really honest matter of that is the capitalization, who can do it the best. You earn that thing in there where it doesn't matter. CDC protocol could come in your stone mill. That National Guard could come up to one of those stone mills where I'm working in. One of two things are going to happen. I'm going to do what they tell you. And what they have to tell them if they're going to occupy that territory, given this physics, unless they're going to do 3M masks, is do it the way I tell them. The timeline of the turn to split the rocks and do it in the prop is almost a military drill for 8-10 hours a day. You can't drop anything because the statistics on the crew line, the training, and the adjusted system are pretty open, and you're going to catch some shit about it. Just a wolf pack out here. Anyways. It was good to see the generals 6 days out in front of this one. Realistically, when were you really concerned about it? Last couple days when things come off, or 6 days ago when some of these things were noticeable? Good to see every general, or at least the definitive function of, hey, YouTube could be civilian or military. I'd love to see more of that. I'd love to see more of that Pentagon conversation. I'd love to hear more of that. Working with FEMA, kind of interpret building hospital thing. The way the president can set that up, he's sorting it to whose department that is, and you have to track those codes through the parallels of timelines that maybe aren't going to be given. It's that all brief is a newspaper proceeding because they're not telling them, they're telling the reporters that tell the proper communication to be able to catch that rabbit. Meanwhile, they're all hubbed. But my point is there. What's the connection of that thing is actually. Like, all right, so why don't you guys just throw up the Borg invasion here in terms of on the map behind you? All right, so now see the statistic right here? Because the same question would be answered by a lot of you people. It's functional. The real question you want is, what can I physically do? And for right now, everybody's kind of on a lockdown. You'd love to help do extra work, but the extra work here is don't do anything. Social time, study. Bring up the calculus models. Start integrating some kind of new language to step in. Prepare your timeline right now, because really, if it's 15 days and we're on 9, it's not a lot of time. When you shake out the deck on the backside of this, I've been working on a workforce program for a few years now to integrate the over system and do cards and things, but obviously you have to do research and funding, get militaries and the math house and the colleges and the prisons and the socials. You gotta work that stuff out. A comment would be nice. Anyways, so it's cool to be able to document that stuff. Again, anything you're in depth with, if you're not physically functioning what something is for you, then it's nothing. It acts within those things. We're comparing resources to the resource notes that we're getting them from, and we're isolating the research notes out themselves to really what gravity is when that checks off here as well. It's good to give those as reference, but they more than likely didn't discover it themselves nowadays. And when it comes to the math and science of a thing, it's a real good idea to think about how at the low end of the top of a few people, CDC, who could recognize a pathogen differential that's never presented itself before by conditions and symptoms, and isolate that inside the crowd instead of just saying, oh, it's a flu, I'll let that guy walk by me in the quickie mart. Militarily as well, realistically, if they were wearing civilian clothes, would you notice a sergeant? I mean, they might say something, they might do something a little differently. Most of them are going to be off. The point there is something that you have to take in sensible models of always policing. Everything is Kelvin here in the stone mill, and that makes any other model of what it is absolutely, like the neutrinos have to make sense that make the collisions in here. The muons coming in from the atmosphere with the time dilation. Catch you on the next one.